Hey there, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments.
If you've ever had a sibling who somehow always managed to land on their feet, no matter how badly they messed up, then you already know the particular flavor of rage that was simmering in my gut when I got the call from Jason. The screen lit up with his name just after 8 in the morning, which was already suspicious. Jason doesn't do early mornings unless he's still awake from the night before, which, as it turned out, was exactly the case. The moment I heard his voice, casual and just slightly slurred with whatever expensive bourbon he'd finished off before dawn, I knew something was wrong. He opened with a chuckle, like we were about to share a funny story, and said, "Hey, so don't freak out, but there's been a little bump with your car." Let me pause right there. When someone opens with "don't freak out," it means you should absolutely freak out. And when that someone is your younger brother, the same brother who once borrowed your first car in college and returned it with a cracked bumper, half a tank of beer breath, and no explanation, you know the story is about to spiral. 2 weeks. That's how long I had owned that car. My brand new midnight blue Lexus RX, fresh from the dealership, still had the scent of premium leather and untouched dignity. I had barely gotten used to the digital dashboard, had just synced my phone, hadn't even removed the protective film from the console screen. And now Jason had totaled it. He didn't use the word totaled, of course. Jason never used real words for real things. He said there was a bump, then when pressed, upgraded it to a fender issue. When I demanded photos, silence. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with images that looked like a war zone. Driver's side caved in, front wheel crooked like a drunk ankle, airbags deployed like fluffy, sarcastic middle fingers. The car was parked against a utility pole at some ungodly angle in what looked like an alley behind a bar. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe heavy. I just sat there, staring at the wreckage on my screen, while he rattled on about how the guy who hit him was probably high and definitely didn't stick around. Then, as if reading from a script that had been rehearsed since childhood, he let out a little laugh and said the line that would stick with me like a rusty nail in my brain. "Relax, Sarah. Mom and Dad'll cover me like always. It's no big deal." That was the moment I stopped listening. Because in that second, I wasn't just looking at the wreckage of a car. I was looking at the wreckage of every Thanksgiving where he showed up late and drunk, every birthday where he forgot to call, every family emergency where I had to pick up the pieces while he played the golden boy. Jason had always landed on his feet because people like my parents made sure the ground beneath him stayed soft. No matter how hard he fell, someone rushed to pad the consequences. But I wasn't padding anything this time. I let him ramble. I even threw in a couple of fake reassurances. "Don't worry, we'll figure it out and just send me the police report," just to keep the act going. He had no clue that in the silence of my living room, with that familiar twist in my chest, I had already started building the first bricks of the wall I was going to slam in his face. Because here's the thing about Jason. He never reads the fine print. Hell, he doesn't even read headlines. And that would be his undoing. The paperwork for the Lexus was in my name and my name alone, not co-signed by Dad, not leased through the family trust, not tucked under some business umbrella the way Jason liked to do with his own toys. Just me, one adult, one clean line of ownership. And the kicker? The insurance specifically stated the car was not to be driven by anyone not listed on the policy, of which Jason was very deliberately not included. So while he was busy charming the world with that crooked smile and cocky tone, thinking this would be just another story to laugh about over turkey and stuffing, I was already one step ahead. I didn't yell because I didn't need to. I didn't cry because I had cried enough over him already. I smiled. A slow, deliberate, teeth-clenched smile that he couldn't see through the phone. "Thanks for telling me," I said softly. "I'm sure it'll work itself out." And in his mind, that meant one thing. Sarah's gonna clean it up, just like always. But this time, I wasn't cleaning up. I was setting the table. You ever reach a point where you realize someone's been walking all over you for so long, they've worn a damn path into your spine? That was me, right then. Looking at those pictures of my mangled Lexus and realizing the real damage wasn't to the car, it was the fact that he didn't even flinch when he wrecked it. Didn't even pause. Because in his world, consequences were other people's problems. And I had been other people for way too long. So I let him think he'd won. Let him believe he was still the untouchable favorite. Let him tell our parents that it was just a hiccup and I was being chill about it. And I even agreed to come to dinner that weekend, his birthday no less. He wanted to celebrate at Mom and Dad's place, all homemade lasagna and family photos, and forced laughter. I told him I wouldn't miss it. And the entire time, I was printing documents, reviewing policy statements, gathering emails, and preparing the exact kind of present only a little sister who's been pushed too far can deliver. But that's for another day. Right now, all you need to know is this. Jason crashed my car, laughed in my face, and thought I'd let it slide. He had no idea I was holding the receipts. Literal, itemized, legally binding receipts. And I was just getting started. There's a specific kind of ache that builds over years, the kind that starts quietly, like a slow drip from a faucet you tell yourself you'll fix tomorrow, but eventually turns into a flood you can't ignore, especially when it's caused not by strangers or even enemies, but by your own family, and more specifically, by the people who were supposed to teach you what fairness looked like, what love without condition felt like, and what it meant to belong. By the time Jason wrecked my car, that ache had already become something else entirely. Not grief, not anger, not even bitterness. Just a bone-deep exhaustion, like I'd been carrying his sins on my back for decades, and I'd finally hit the point where I could either put them down or let them crush me. To anyone looking in from the outside, the story of my brother and me probably seemed like the usual case of older sister and charming younger sibling. A dynamic where I was the responsible one, the steady one, the one who followed the rules, did her homework, remembered birthdays, and folded the laundry the way Mom liked it. While Jason danced through life like everything was one big performance, laughing, charming, screwing up, and then somehow still getting a round of applause at the end of every act. But what people didn't see, what they couldn't understand unless they'd lived it, was how deeply the script had been embedded into our family's DNA, and how early that favoritism started. I remember one Christmas, Jason must have been 9, which would have made me 11. I had saved up for weeks doing chores for the neighbors, raking leaves, walking dogs, doing whatever I could because I wanted to buy Mom a set of those crystal wine glasses she always admired at the department store. When she opened them, she smiled politely, kissed my cheek, and set them aside. 10 minutes later, Jason handed her a macaroni necklace held together with Elmer's glue and 3 mismatched beads, and she burst into tears like he had just delivered a Picasso. "You're so thoughtful," she whispered, holding his face in her hands. And I remember sitting there, surrounded by wrapping paper and discarded bows, wondering if being thoughtful only counted when it came from him. That kind of thing didn't just happen once. It was the rhythm of our family life. When Jason forgot to do his homework, Mom would write notes blaming his teacher for not making things interesting enough. When he stole $20 from Dad's wallet in high school and got caught, they grounded him for one night, then let him host a party in the backyard the next weekend because he was feeling down and needed support. Meanwhile, I once got a B- in calculus, and it triggered a 20-minute lecture about wasted potential and setting the bar higher for yourself. Even now, it feels ridiculous to say it out loud, like I'm auditioning for a bad family drama. But when you live with that double standard long enough, it stops feeling dramatic and just becomes normal. By the time Jason was in college, the consequences had gotten bigger, but the reactions hadn't changed. He flunked out of his first semester because he never went to class, and instead of letting him face the fallout, my parents pulled strings with a family friend, got him into a smaller private school, and framed it like a better fit for his creativity. When he married too young, cheated on his wife, then left her 6 months later, Mom whispered to me at Thanksgiving that he just wasn't ready for that kind of commitment yet, as if marriage had been some accidental contract he'd stumbled into. When she called me later crying because his ex-wife had posted about him on Facebook, her concern wasn't about what he'd done. It was about how he looked. So by the time he crashed my car and shrugged it off like a toddler knocking over a cup of juice, it wasn't shocking. It was just the latest entry in a long list of Jason doesn't pay the price. And the part that stung the most wasn't the dented metal or the cracked glass or the mess of insurance paperwork. It was the fact that he didn't even ask me if I was okay. Didn't ask how I was getting to work. Didn't offer to help. Didn't show the slightest sign of guilt. Because in his world, my world only existed to cushion his falls. That week, while I waited for the insurance company to respond to the claim, I sat down with a cup of coffee and started listing everything I'd let slide over the years. Not because I wanted to wallow in it, but because I needed to see it all in one place, needed to face the full inventory of what I had swallowed just to keep the family peace. There were pages of moments, things I hadn't thought about in years. The time he lost our dog because he left the gate open, blamed me for not double-checking it. The time he took my debit card without asking and used it for gas, told me it was an emergency. The time he stole my thunder at my college graduation by showing up late, wearing sunglasses, claiming he had a migraine, and somehow becoming the center of attention. And through it all, I played the role. The good daughter, the forgiving sister, the reliable adult. I thought if I just kept doing the right thing, someone would notice. That maybe one day, fairness would finally show up like some long-lost cousin who missed their train. But fairness never came. All that came was silence, and the quiet weight of one more injustice quietly folded into the pile. I think what finally broke me wasn't the crash or the money. It was the way Jason said, like always, like it was a punchline, a catchphrase, a guarantee. He didn't see it as abuse or favoritism or even irresponsibility. He saw it as the natural order of things, and that's what I couldn't unhear. So I stopped waiting for someone to balance the scales. I stopped hoping for Mom and Dad to finally open their eyes. I stopped praying that Jason would have some come-to-Jesus moment and realize he'd turned into a walking disaster with good hair. Instead, I started planning. Quietly, patiently, thoroughly, and when I found the clause in the insurance policy that stated no unauthorized driver would be covered, when I realized I had signed every document myself, held every receipt, owned every piece of that car legally and unequivocally, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about revenge, not in the petty cartoonish sense. This was about breaking a cycle. This was about holding someone accountable, even if it had to be my own blood. Because at the end of the day, I didn't want Jason to suffer. I wanted him to understand that for once in his life, he had to stand on his own, and I was going to make sure he had no choice. The most dangerous kind of revenge isn't the loud, messy kind, fueled by heat-of-the-moment rage, or some dramatic, screaming confrontation in front of a crowd. No, the truly dangerous kind. The one that gets under the skin and lingers in the mind long after the dust has settled, is cold, quiet, and calculated, designed not to destroy a person physically, but to dismantle their entire sense of entitlement. Brick by smug little brick. And after years of swallowing my pride, biting my tongue until it practically bled, and watching my brother Jason navigate life with the reckless confidence of a man who had never faced a single meaningful consequence, I knew the only way to make this count, the only way to finally teach him that grown-ups clean up their own messes, was to strike with precision, not passion. So I played along. I answered his calls with a warm tone and carefully measured concern, never once letting my voice betray the weight of the plans already forming behind my smile. I told him not to worry about the car, not to stress over the insurance paperwork, and even went so far as to reassure him that, like always, I'd take care of it, using his exact words like a lullaby to rock him into a false sense of security. He bought it instantly, of course. He always did, because that's what years of unearned confidence will do to a man like Jason. He assumed I'd do what I always did, absorb the impact, shield him from the fallout, and pretend it never happened once the embarrassment passed. But this time, I wasn't cleaning anything up. I was setting the table for a long overdue reckoning. The first thing I did was contact the insurance company, not to file a claim, but to inform them, with legal clarity, that the individual driving the vehicle at the time of the incident was not listed as an authorized driver on the policy, and that, as such, I would not be seeking coverage under the terms of our agreement. I made sure the email was carefully worded, referenced every clause necessary, and attached a copy of the signed policy for emphasis. The adjuster responded with professional approval, confirming that my out-of-pocket costs would be substantial, but also acknowledging that the company was absolved of responsibility. Perfect. Next, I took the car, towed from the alley where Jason had so thoughtfully abandoned it after calling me, to a repair shop that wasn't interested in shortcuts or favors. I told them I wanted an honest assessment, no insurance markup, just the cold, hard truth about what it would cost to undo the damage. The estimate was even worse than I expected. Almost $12,000 in repairs, a number Jason had never once considered in his half-assed apology call, or his cheerful text the next day asking if I could still make it to his birthday dinner. But I didn't respond with fury or sarcasm. Instead, I smiled, because now I had a number, a clean, clear, itemized cost for his bullshit, and I had every intention of making sure he saw it in full color. Eli, my fiancé, noticed the change in me almost immediately. He's not the type to pry, but one night, as I was organizing the paperwork, police reports, repair estimates, email confirmations, he looked at me from across the table and asked very quietly, "You sure this is the way you want to do it?" He wasn't being judgmental. If anything, he was concerned that I was dipping into a darker part of myself, the part that had been quietly collecting these grievances for years, waiting for a reason to come out of the corner. I paused, then looked him dead in the eye. "I'm not doing this to be cruel," I said. "I'm doing this because it's the only way he'll ever learn. He's been told his whole life that the rules don't apply to him. I'm just going to prove they do." Eli didn't argue. He just nodded and went back to his book. That's the thing I love about him. He doesn't try to fix me when I get like this. He just lets me finish the story I've already started writing. So I called my parents, told them I'd love to come to dinner for Jason's birthday, asked if they needed help with the food, even offered to bring dessert. My mom, in her usual syrupy tone, said she was so glad I wasn't holding on to any bad energy about the car, that Jason felt terrible and just wanted everyone to have a good time. I could hear him in the background laughing at something on TV, completely unfazed, like the whole thing had already been written off as another Sarah overreacting scenario. And I realized right then that this dinner would be the perfect stage. I told Mom I had a little surprise for Jason, a gesture of goodwill, I said. Something to make peace and move forward. She got emotional like she always does, praising me for being the bigger person. And I played my part beautifully, right down to the tone of my voice and the carefully hidden satisfaction in my chest. What they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the surprise I had planned wasn't a gift or a count or some sentimental speech. It was the truth, documented, verified, packaged in a neat little folder with his name printed on the front. Because this wasn't just about a car. This was about decades of getting away with it. About every Christmas where his lies became jokes, every phone call where his mistakes became life lessons. Every time I was asked to understand, to forgive, to be the anchor while he got to drift wherever the hell he wanted. I wasn't going to scream or cry or throw plates across the room. I was just going to let the facts speak. And I was going to do it where it mattered most. At the dinner table with Mom and Dad watching, their golden boy front and center. They'd all see it, the whole damn show. And when the curtain dropped for the first time in his life, Jason would be standing in the wreckage alone. There's a certain kind of silence that creeps into a room just before a storm breaks. The kind where everyone is still smiling, still sipping wine, still pretending that everything is exactly as it should be. Even though, beneath all the small talk and the clinking of silverware, there's an invisible tension humming just under the surface like a wire stretched too tight. That was the atmosphere that hung over the dining room as we gathered around the long, polished table for Jason's birthday dinner, a family tradition that had, over the years, become less about celebration and more about performance, about playing our roles, laughing at the right moments, complimenting Mom's lasagna even when it was burned on the edges, and keeping the peace no matter how frayed it had become behind closed doors. I arrived early, of course, because that's who I am, the reliable one, the one who shows up with wine and a fresh pie, the one who helps set the table while Jason strolls in late with his phone in one hand and sunglasses still perched on his head like he's walking into a beach party instead of his own damn birthday dinner. When he finally did make his grand entrance, it was with the same overconfident swagger he'd had since high school, wearing a leather jacket that didn't belong in a family dining room and flashing a grin like he'd just closed a deal on Wall Street, not wrecked a $60,000 car, and laughed about it like it was an inside joke. "Sarah," he said, pulling me into a half-hug that smelled like cologne and carelessness. "Glad you made it. Thought you might still be mad about the whole car thing." I smiled the way someone does when they know exactly how the evening's going to end, but still want to give the performance its full arc. "Don't be silly," I said, letting my voice drip with false warmth. "It's your birthday. Tonight's about you." And oh, how right I was. Dinner unfolded exactly as expected. Mom fluttering around the kitchen, proud of her overcooked lasagna and garlic bread that tasted more like regret than rosemary. Dad quietly refilling everyone's wine glasses like it was his only purpose in life. And Jason, of course, at the center of it all, telling exaggerated stories from work, none of which added up, and cracking jokes that were met with polite laughter because that was the unspoken rule. Jason must always be entertained. I waited until the plates were cleared, until the candles had burned down low, until everyone was just tipsy enough for their defenses to be lowered, but still clear enough to understand every single word. Then I stood up gently, calmly, and reached into my bag for the folder I had prepared. A plain, unassuming manila folder with Jason's name written across the front in black marker, not flashy, not dramatic, but unmistakably deliberate. "I know we don't usually do gifts at the table," I said, and everyone turned to look at me, curious, half smiling, expecting maybe a photo album or a heartfelt card. Jason raised an eyebrow, leaned back in his chair like a king awaiting tribute. "But I put something together for you, Jason, a little recap of this year's accomplishments." I placed the folder in front of him, right on his placemat, and watched as he opened it, flipping casually through the first few pages. Repair estimates, tow truck invoices, photographs of the crash site, all neatly labeled and time-stamped. His smirk faded almost instantly, replaced by confusion, then discomfort, and finally something that looked like the early stirrings of panic. "What the hell is this?" he asked, his voice louder than necessary in the now silent room. "That," I said evenly, "is the total cost of the car you destroyed, including labor, parts, rental fees, and the clause in my insurance that denies any claim involving an unauthorized driver, which you were. I thought it was time you saw what responsibility looks like in actual numbers." Mom blinked, reaching slowly for her wine glass. "Sarah, this is—" "No," I interrupted, keeping my gaze on Jason. "This isn't about punishment. This is about reality. You've spent your whole life believing the world owes you a free pass, and for some reason, this family has let you believe that. But it ends tonight." Jason stood up, eyes flashing, the charm stripped clean away. "You're trying to embarrass me in front of Mom and Dad?" I didn't flinch. "I'm not trying to embarrass you, Jason. I'm trying to hold you accountable. If that embarrasses you, that's not on me." Dad looked between us, clearly torn, the way he always was when his two children clashed. Never willing to choose a side, forever stuck in the role of the pacifier. "Maybe this isn't the time." "Actually," I said, cutting him off without raising my voice, "this is exactly the time. Because it's his birthday, and what better gift than finally treating him like the adult he claims to be?" Jason looked back at the folder, at the harsh black and white reality staring up at him. And for the first time in years, maybe ever, he didn't have a comeback. No joke, no excuse, No quick way to charm his way out of it. Just silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Mom leaned in, her voice low, laced with disappointment. You didn't have to humiliate him, Sarah. I turned to her, calm and unblinking. Didn't I? Because if humiliation is what it takes to wake him up, to stop him from thinking the world is a padded playground built for his convenience, then maybe it's exactly what I had to do. The air was thick. No one spoke. No one moved. And for the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the one shrinking under the weight of someone else's poor choices. I was the one holding the mirror, and Jason finally had to look. No more cover stories, no more favors, no more pretending that damage doesn't count if you smile while doing it. Happy birthday, Jason. This year, you got a grown-up gift, the bill. In the days that followed that dinner, now etched in my memory, with the kind of sharp clarity typically reserved for funerals and breakups, the silence from Jason was deafening, not the sulking, passive-aggressive kind I had grown accustomed to over the years when things didn't go his way, but a strange hollow quietness, as though he had been stripped of some invisible armor and wasn't quite sure how to walk around in the world without it. For the first time, I think he realized that the scaffolding he had always assumed would be there, Mom's sympathy, Dad's quiet checks, my reluctant cleanups, had been disassembled piece by piece, and that the floor he thought was solid had crumbled under the weight of one undeniable truth. He had run out of excuses, and the safety net had been burned. I didn't gloat, I didn't send follow-up emails or I told you so texts, or call the rest of the family to debrief them on my moral victory. In fact, I kept my head down, went to work, and tried to focus on the silence itself. Tried to find something peaceful in the space where all his noise used to be. But peace is a tricky thing when you've lived without it for so long. It feels unnatural, almost suspicious, like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, even after you've thrown both shoes out the window yourself. Eli watched me closely during those days, not with judgment, but with the kind of quiet concern that doesn't need to be spoken aloud. He didn't say I'd gone too far, didn't accuse me of cruelty or vengeance disguised as righteousness. But one night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, he finally asked the question I'd been avoiding, the one that had been hovering between us like fog. "Do you feel better?" he said softly, not looking at me, just drawing a plate like it was any other evening. I paused, stared at the sponge in my hand, and tried to answer honestly, because Eli didn't deserve anything less. "I don't know," I said. "I thought I would. I thought standing up for myself would feel like relief. But now it just feels quiet and strange." Because the truth is, you can prepare for the confrontation. You can write the speech and print the documents and anticipate every possible reaction. But you can't really prepare for the emotional debris that settles afterward. The guilt, the doubt, the hollow victory that doesn't taste as sweet as you imagined. I knew Jason had needed a wake-up call. I knew the old dynamic had to die for something healthier to take root. But that didn't mean I wasn't mourning what had been lost in the process, even if what was lost had never really served me. My parents, of course, responded in their own predictable ways. My mother, unable to sit with discomfort for more than a moment, tried to smooth it all over with passive-aggressive phone calls about how families should stick together, peppered with subtle digs about how public spectacles don't solve private problems. I didn't take the bait. I listened, nodded where appropriate, and hung up with a sense of finality I hadn't known I was capable of. My father, true to form, said nothing, which was somehow more infuriating than any lecture could have been. He simply avoided the topic altogether, as if silence could rewrite history. But Jason finally called 4 days after the dinner, his voice stripped of its usual swagger, quieter, more unsure, like he wasn't entirely convinced I'd pick up. When I answered, there was a pause, and then he said something I had never heard from him in our 30-plus years as siblings. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. Not angry, not defensive, just stunned. "I know," I replied. "You never do." Another pause. Then he asked, "So what now?" It was a good question. One I didn't have a clean answer to. Because what happens after the curtain falls and the villain realizes he's been wearing the wrong costume the whole time? What happens after the truth is out and everyone has to find new roles in a family that's been rehearsing the same dysfunctional script for decades? I don't know, I said finally. Maybe now you figure out how to pay your own debts. And maybe I stop pretending I'm responsible for everything you break. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful apology, no sudden transformation into the brother I'd always wanted, but never had. He didn't swear to change, didn't offer to reimburse me, didn't even try to shift the blame, but he listened. And when the call ended, I realized that maybe, for the first time, he had actually heard me. Still, not everything was so neat, because when you upend a system, when you knock over the carefully stacked tower of family illusions, you don't get to control how everyone reacts to the mess. Relationships shift, distance grows, old wounds resurface, and not everyone wants to heal them. In the weeks that followed, I saw my parents less, got fewer calls, fewer invitations, and while part of me grieved that, another part felt strangely free, like I was no longer required to perform a version of myself that kept the peace at the expense of my own sanity. One night, a few weeks later, I found myself digging through an old box in the attic, looking for something unrelated. A tax form, I think, and instead came across a dusty old camcorder. Curious, I plugged it in, scrolled through the tapes, and landed on a home video from when Jason and I were kids. We must have been around 7 and 9, sitting on the living room floor in our pajamas, laughing at something only we found funny, faces still untouched by resentment or rivalry or the twisted favoritism that would come to define our relationship. For a moment, I watched in silence, mesmerized by the sound of our laughter, so genuine, so unburdened, and I felt something unexpected tug at my chest, not regret, not sorrow, just recognition. We hadn't always been broken, but somewhere along the way, the cracks formed, slowly, quietly, shaped by choices and patterns and unspoken rules that none of us had the courage to challenge until now. So no, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt awake. And maybe that's all I ever wanted. Not revenge, not vindication, but a moment of clarity in the fog. A final unraveling of a narrative that had trapped us all. Jason still hasn't paid me back. He probably never will. But he hasn't asked to borrow anything since. And that, in its own strange way, feels like progress. Maybe the car wasn't the thing that broke. Maybe we were all just driving on borrowed time.